The day a woman decided my calloused hands were too dirty to touch my own grandchild. She had no idea she was setting a clock in motion. And honey, that clock just ran out. Let me paint you a picture of the man I was on the morning of November 23rd, 8 years ago. I'd been up since 4 a.m., not because I had to be, but because I was too excited to sleep. My son Gabriel had called me a few days earlier to say his wife had given birth to a healthy baby boy. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. They named him Samuel. Our son Gabriel lived in Atlanta with his wife, a woman named Nora, in one of those new developments in Alpharetta where every house looks exactly like the neighbor's house. Dorothy and I had our good clothes on. I had my navy blue shirt, bought it for myself the previous Christmas, because I needed one good shirt that wasn't for yard work. Dorothy had on her blue dress with the white buttons. I was 67 years old, retired after 31 years teaching 8th grade history at Pinecrest Middle School in Macon. And that morning, my wife Dorothy was sitting in the passenger seat beside me, already talking about what she was going to cook for Nora when we got there. On the back seat, wrapped in brown paper and tied with kitchen twine, was a wooden rocking horse I had spent 6 weeks carving in my workshop out back. Walnut wood, smooth as glass. I'd burned the boy's name into the side, Samuel. I was so proud of that horse I could barely stand it. Dorothy kept touching the brown paper wrapping the whole drive up. We pulled into Gabriel's neighborhood at 10:30 in the morning. I grabbed the rocking horse. Dorothy straightened her dress. We walked up that stone pathway to the front door together, and I rang the bell, feeling like the luckiest man in Georgia. Gabriel answered. He looked tired the way new fathers look tired. Happy tired, the good kind. He smiled when he saw us. "Hey, Dad. Mom. Come on in." That was the last uncomplicated moment of the entire visit. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get comfortable, because this story is going to take you somewhere. Hit that like button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The house smelled like fresh flowers and something expensive, from a candle. Everything was cream and white and carefully arranged. We followed Gabriel through the entryway into the living room, and I stopped in the doorway for just a second. The room was full. Nora was on the couch, and beside her, seated were her parents. Her father, a tall man in pressed slacks named Richard, and her mother, Beverly, sitting with the relaxed ease of people who had been there for hours. And in a bassinet beside Nora, Samuel. This tiny, perfect, sleeping little person wrapped in a white blanket. My heart just stopped, then restarted twice as hard. Dorothy grabbed my arm. "Oh, James," she whispered. "Look at him." She looked up at us, and I want to be precise about what I saw in her eyes because I've thought about it 10,000 times since. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't warmth. It was assessment, like a woman pricing furniture at an estate sale. She looked at my boots, my hands, Dorothy's modest dress, my truck through the window behind us. Then she glanced, just briefly, at her mother. A glance that lasted half a second, but said everything. Richard and Beverly said nothing, just watched. "James." She said my name the way you say the name of something you're not sure you want in your house. I stepped forward toward the bassinet with my arms open. The most natural thing in the world, right? A grandfather reaching for his grandson. 4 hours of driving. A whole heart full of love with nowhere to put it yet. And Nora stood up. She positioned herself between me and that bassinet like a Secret Service agent, and she said, "And Lord help me, I will hear these words until the day they put me in the ground. James, I'm sorry, but I'd rather you didn't. You don't exactly live in the cleanest conditions. Don't touch him. And you too." She pointed at my wife, Dorothy. The room went silent. I mean the specific silence of a moment where something has been said that cannot be unsaid, where the air itself goes still because it doesn't know what to do either. I felt Dorothy go rigid beside me, felt her hand tighten on my arm, not pulling me back, just holding on, like she was steadying herself as much as me. I looked at Gabriel. Gabriel looked at the floor. That right there, that moment, my son looking at the floor. That hurt worse than anything Nora said. That hurt in a place I didn't even know could hurt. And then Beverly, Nora's mother, stood up without a word. No hesitation, no awkwardness. Like this had already been decided before we walked through the door. She reached into that bassinet, lifted Samuel into her arms, and walked quietly down the hallway toward the bedroom. Dorothy watched her go. I watched Dorothy watch her go. And that right there, was the moment that broke something in my wife that she has never fully spoken about. Not the words Nora said to me, but watching another grandmother carry our grandson away from her like she wasn't even in the room, like she was invisible, like she was nothing. I stood there for 3 full seconds. I know because I counted. Not on purpose. My mind just needed something to hold on to. Then I did what my mother raised me to do when the world shows you its worst. I smiled. Quiet, dignified. Richard, Nora's dad, sat in his chair, coughed, and looked away. I set the wooden rocking horse on the coffee table. I said, "I understand. Congratulations to you both." I put my hand briefly on Dorothy's back, and we walked out. We didn't say a single word about the clothes we'd worn with care, or the 4 hours we'd driven, or the fact that our home, our modest, spotless hand-built home on Ridgewood Lane in Macon, had never once in 40 years had a dirty floor. We got in my truck. I put it in reverse. I drove. 4 hours back. The two of us, in a silence that was somehow lonelier than being alone. Dorothy didn't speak for the first hour. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked out the passenger window at the pine trees going by. I knew better than to rush her. Finally, somewhere around the Forsyth exit, she said very quietly, "She looked at us, James." I know. And her mother she just walked away with him like I wasn't standing right there. I know, Dorothy. Another long silence. We got home at 3 in the afternoon. I walked into my workshop, sat down on my old stool next to the workbench, and I wept like I hadn't in a very long time. Now, are you still with me? Because this is only where the story starts. The weeks after that visit moved slow and strange. I kept waiting for the phone to ring, kept thinking Gabriel would call that night, or the next day, or by the weekend at the latest, and say, "Dad, Mom, I'm sorry. That was wrong. Come back." The phone didn't ring. Days became weeks. Weeks tipped into a month. I sent a Christmas card in December, with a little check inside for Samuel's first Christmas, a boy I'd held for 0 seconds. I addressed it careful, wrote a small note, mailed it from the post office on Vineville Avenue. Got a card back from Gabriel, just Gabriel, that said, "Thanks, Dad. Hope you're well." Hope you're well. Like I was a distant uncle, like I was a man he'd met once at a conference. Dorothy took that harder than she let on. She kept that card on the kitchen counter for 3 days before she moved it. I noticed, but I didn't say anything. I kept sending things, every birthday circled in red on my kitchen calendar, every Christmas. I'm not a wealthy man by any measure. I live on a teacher's pension and Social Security, and what little we'd saved over the decades. But I sent what I could. Books, small carved toys from the workshop, cards with notes inside that I wrote and rewrote until the words felt right. What I did not know, what I would not discover for years, was that Nora was intercepting every single one, every card, every package, returned or hidden before Gabriel ever laid eyes on them. And when Gabriel tried to call me, and apparently he did try, early on, she'd answer and say he was busy. She'd start an argument the moment my name came up. She built a wall between my son and his parents, 1 brick at a time, and she used her own marriage as the mortar. I didn't know any of this yet. All I knew was the silence. So I did what a man does when he has no other choice. I lived. I tended my garden in the backyard. Tomatoes, collard greens that my neighbor Mark Fletcher said were the best he'd ever tasted. I kept teaching woodworking 2 afternoons a week at Pinecrest, volunteering, no pay, just because the kids needed it and I needed to be needed. Dorothy kept her flower beds along the front porch, and her Tuesday Bible study at First Baptist on Riverside Drive, and her way of making the house feel like a home, even when the house felt quieter than it should have. But every night, every single night, I sat at my kitchen table before bed, hands folded, and I said the same quiet prayer. "Lord, just let me live long enough to know that boy." What 8 years of quiet dignity looks like from the inside is not what you'd expect. It doesn't look noble. Most days it just feels like absence, like a chair at a table that stays empty, like a birthday that comes and goes, and you spend it wondering if a boy in Alpharetta has any idea that 2 people in Macon love him so much it's almost a physical ache. Dorothy and I don't talk about it every day. There are couples who process everything out loud, every feeling, every wound, every layer of a thing. We are not those people. We are the kind of people who carry things quietly together, which is its own kind of closeness. She knows what I'm thinking when I go to the workshop after supper. I know what she's thinking when she sets an extra place at the table on Samuel's birthday, and then quietly puts it away. We don't say the words. We don't have to. But back to Gabriel. because you need to understand what was happening on his end of this story. And I promise you it matters. Gabriel had everything. Beautiful home in Alpharetta, a career in finance going well by every visible measure, a wife who kept a perfect house and appeared at every neighborhood function in the right outfit with the right smile, and a son, my grandson Samuel, who by all accounts was bright and funny and the kind of kid teachers remembered. What Gabriel also had, though nobody in that perfect neighborhood could see it, was guilt so heavy it had started to bend him. He never forgot that day, the wooden horse on the coffee table, my face, Dorothy standing rigid beside me, the way we walked out without a word. He told me all of this later. I'm not guessing. I'm telling you what my son confessed to me with his own voice, shaking. He said he thought about it constantly, said it was like a splinter he couldn't reach. And instead of pulling it out, he did what a lot of men do with pain they won't face. He drank. Just one glass after work at first. Then two. Then the bottle was empty before dinner hit the table. Nora saw it, said nothing, because to address Gabriel's drinking was to ask why he was drinking. And why he was drinking was a door she had locked and plastered over and had no intention of opening. Their house was polite, cold and polite. Two people moving through separate lives in the same square footage, held together by a mortgage and a child, and the mutual agreement not to say the true thing out loud. And then one evening at dinner, Samuel was 8 years old. The question came, "Dad, how come I only have one grandpa and one grandma? Caleb has two of each." Gabriel froze, fork suspended halfway to his mouth. Nora went very still across the table. "It's complicated, buddy," Gabriel said. That was all he could manage. He excused himself from the table, walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and wept like a child. I want you to hold that image for a moment. My son, a grown man, sitting on the edge of a bathtub in his expensive house, crying over parents he had been separated from by a lie he'd allowed. That night, he made a decision. He was done being a coward. About 7 years into the silence, a young man named Brandon Cole walked into the Macon Gazette office and pitched a story to the features editor. Brandon had been my student back in the late 90s. Skinny kid, always drawing floor plans in the margins of his history notes. Drove me absolutely crazy. I made him stay after class one day to lecture him about paying attention, and he said, dead serious, "Mr. Bennett, I already know the history. I'm designing the building where it's going to happen next." I let him draw after that. Brandon grew up to be a fairly successful architect in Middle Georgia, and for some reason, gratitude, I suppose, or just the particular nostalgia that hits a man in his 30s, he pitched the Gazette a piece about me, about what my class had meant to him, about the woodworking afternoons and how I'd let him design a birdhouse instead of building the standard model, and how that small permission had unlocked something in him. The article ran on a Sunday. The man who taught me everything. Half page above the fold, with a photograph of me in the workshop that I absolutely did not know Brandon was taking. I expected nothing from it. Figured maybe a few people I knew would mention it at church. Instead, the thing spread. Not viral like a celebrity video. Quiet viral. The way things move in a community when they hit something true. People shared it. Former students I hadn't heard from in 20 years called the school, looking for me. A woman in Warner Robins wrote me a handwritten letter saying her son had been in my class and she'd never properly thanked me. And somewhere in Alpharetta, Georgia, a man named Gabriel read that article on his phone at 11 o'clock at night, sitting in his car in his own driveway, because he couldn't go inside yet. He called me 2 days later. I almost didn't answer. I didn't recognize the number. He was calling from his work cell, it turned out, because he was afraid Nora would see the call history. That detail right there should tell you everything about the state of that marriage. I picked up on the fourth ring. "Dad." One word. And I knew his voice immediately. The way you always know your child's voice, no matter how many years pass, no matter how much everything else changes. Gabriel. Long silence. I read the article. I saw that. Another silence. Then, "Dad, I need to see you." "Can I come to Macon?" The same table I'd sat at every night for 8 years with my hands folded. The same window with the oak tree outside. I looked at Dorothy. She was standing in the doorway with a dish towel in her hands, and she had heard enough to understand what was happening. Her eyes were already wet. She nodded once. "I'll put the coffee on," I said. Gabriel drove down on a Saturday morning 3 weeks later, alone. No Nora. But he brought Samuel. Now I need you to understand what happened when I opened that front door and saw my grandson for the first time in 8 years, and only the second time in his entire life. He was 8 years old. Dark hair like Gabriel had at that age. Quiet, watchful eyes that took everything in before he spoke. He was holding his father's hand, and he looked up at me with the most serious expression I have ever seen on a child's face, and he said, "Are you my Grandpa James?" I could not speak for a full 3 seconds. "Yes, sir," I finally managed. "I am." And Samuel, this boy I had prayed for every single night for 8 years, let go of his father's hand, walked right up to me, and hugged me around the middle like he'd been practicing for it. I held on to that child, and I thanked God quietly, and I did not let go for a long time. Gabriel stood in the doorway with tears on his face, and didn't try to stop them. Dorothy came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, and when she saw Samuel, she made a sound I had not heard from her in years. Just a soft, broken "oh," and then she was across the porch and on her knees, hugging that boy like she was afraid he might disappear. Samuel hugged her back with both arms. Completely natural, like something in him recognized something in her. We spent the morning in the workshop. I showed Samuel my tools, showed him the workbench where I'd made the rocking horse 8 years ago. He ran his hands over everything with the careful curiosity that good children have, and asked questions. "What's this for? How does that work? Can I try?" And I answered every single one. By noon, he had made a small wooden box, rough and lopsided and absolutely perfect. Dorothy fed us lunch and sat across the table from Samuel, the entire meal just watching him eat, like she couldn't quite believe he was real. After lunch, when Samuel was in the backyard inspecting my garden and conducting what I can only describe as a very thorough investigation of my tomato situation, Gabriel and I sat at the kitchen table, just the two of us. Dorothy had quietly gone to the bedroom to give us space. That's the kind of woman she is, always knowing when to stay and when to step back. 2 cups of coffee. 8 years of silence between us like a third person in the room. He started to speak twice and stopped. Then on the third try the words came, and once they started they didn't stop. "Dad?" His voice broke on the first syllable. I should have never let this happen. I stood there that day and I said nothing. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but I was just a coward. You and Mom deserved better. You deserved a son who stood up for you, and I failed you. I failed my own boy too, and I don't expect you to forgive me today. I just need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry. He dropped his head. His shoulders shook. I want to tell you I said something wise, something quotable, something that would look good at the end of an article. But what I actually did was reach across the table and put my hand on my son's arm and say, "Drink your coffee before it gets cold." He laughed, wet and ragged, but he laughed, and that was us. The beginning of us, anyway. Finding our way back 1 cup of coffee at a time, they started coming down to Macon every few weeks. Always on Saturdays, always without telling Nora exactly where they were going. Gabriel would say he was taking Samuel to a game or a friend's house, some half-truth that I wasn't proud to be the subject of but understood. Dorothy always had something cooking by the time they arrived. She and Samuel had developed their own language fast. She'd teach him the garden, he'd ask questions about every plant with that same thorough curiosity, and she'd answer everyone with the patience of a woman who had been waiting 8 years to be somebody's grandmother properly. But meanwhile, and here is where I need you to buckle up, back in Alpharetta, things were unraveling fast. Gabriel started noticing things. He'd always been the kind of man who didn't pay close attention to the administrative details of his own life. Nora handled the mail, the packages, the household. He worked, she managed. That arrangement had been invisible to him for years. But now that he was paying attention, he started seeing the edges of things. A returned package with handwriting he recognized. A phone number in Nora's call history logged as unknown. That turned out to be the post office on Vineville Avenue in Macon. A moment at dinner when he mentioned his parents' names casually, and watched Nora's jaw tighten in a way that was just a half-second too controlled. He went looking, found a box in the back of the attic crawl space above the guest bedroom, behind the Christmas decorations, behind the suitcases, pushed back against the far wall like someone had put it there hoping it would become part of the architecture. He opened it. Every card, every package, 8 years' worth. Samuel's birthday cards, Christmas gifts still wrapped. 2 children's books. A small carved wooden truck. I'd made it for Samuel's 4th birthday. Spent 3 evenings on it. And a note from Dorothy tucked inside a Christmas card, written in her careful handwriting. We think about you every single day, sweet boy. All of it unopened. All of it hidden. Gabriel sat in that attic for 20 minutes holding Dorothy's note. That's the one that broke him, he told me later. Not my cards. Not the gifts. That note in his mother's handwriting, never read, hidden in a box in the dark. He brought the box downstairs, set it on the kitchen table, waited for Nora to come in from the garage. When she walked into the kitchen and saw the box, she stopped cold. You told me they stopped sending things after year 1, Gabriel said. Nora looked at the box, looked at Gabriel, opened her mouth. Nothing came out. 8 years, Nora. My mother wrote letters to my son that he never got to read. Still nothing. Then finally, with nowhere left to go, she played her last card standing right there in that kitchen. It's either your parents or this family, Gabriel. Gabriel picked up the box, took it to the bedroom, set it in the corner where he could see it from the bed. Something died in him that night. Not their marriage, that had been dying for years. Something else. The last version of himself that was willing to pretend. That version died, and good riddance to it. I won't dress up the divorce with more drama than it deserves. These things are ugly and slow, and full of lawyers and paperwork and moments nobody wants to talk about at dinner parties. Gabriel filed in February. Nora did not take it quietly. First came the calls to mutual friends. Then came the suggestions to Gabriel's colleagues that he was unstable, that the drinking, his drinking, was the real problem here. Never mind who had caused who to drink. Then came the ultimatum again, this time delivered on a Wednesday night when Samuel was at a sleepover at his friend Cooper's house. You choose me or them, Gabriel. Gabriel told me about this on the phone the next morning. I could hear in his voice that he'd been up all night. What did you say? I asked. Long pause. I said, you are the reason this family is broken, Nora, not them. I closed my eyes and breathed out slow. Gabriel. Yeah, I'm proud of you, son. Another pause. I know. Now here is where Nora made her last and most desperate calculation. Gabriel had a lawyer. A good one. A man named Douglas Holt, out of Buckhead, who was known around Atlanta family court as exceedingly thorough. And Nora, who had not worked seriously in 9 years of marriage, who had no income, no independent savings, and who was beginning to understand that Douglas Holt had already filed paperwork establishing a very clear timeline of parental interference. Nora was panicking. She had one card left, or she thought she did. It was a Thursday afternoon I heard the knock. I was in the workshop, sanding a chair leg. I had the radio on low, old country, the kind with actual instruments, and the afternoon light was coming through the window at that long golden angle. Dorothy was inside making supper. I could smell onions from the kitchen. I wasn't expecting anyone. I set down the sandpaper, wiped my hands on my shop rag, walked through the back door into the kitchen. Dorothy looked up from the stove with a question on her face. I shrugged and went to the front door. I opened it. Nora was standing on my porch, and beside her, holding her hand with the specific energy of a child who isn't entirely sure what is happening but is going along with it, was Samuel. I want to describe this moment accurately. What I actually felt when I saw Nora standing on my porch in Macon for the first and only time was something more complicated than triumph. Mostly I felt tired, and a little sad. And also, I won't lie, a small quiet current of something that I can only describe as the specific satisfaction of a man who waited long enough. Nora had on a nice outfit, hair done, but her eyes were red and there was a tightness around her mouth that all the makeup in the world couldn't quite cover. Dad, she said. She called me Dad, not James. Dad. I let that sit for exactly 1 second. Nora, I said. We looked at each other across 8 years of everything. Can I come in? I stepped back from the door. Samuel came in and went straight to Dorothy in the kitchen. Didn't hesitate. Just walked right to her like he knew exactly where she'd be. She wrapped her arms around him and looked at me over his head with those eyes of hers. Then Nora stood in my living room looking at everything the way she had once looked at us, assessing. But this time what she was recalibrating against was the gap between what she'd told herself for 8 years and what was actually in front of her. The built-in bookshelves, the framed photographs, the careful order of a house that had been a home since before she was born. Not the squalor she'd imagined. Not even close. She sat on the couch. Dorothy quietly took Samuel to the kitchen, giving the room to what needed to happen in it. Then Nora's speech came. It had clearly been prepared, and it was a decent one. Appeals to family unity, to Samuel's stability, to the importance of parents staying together. She even managed tears at the right moments. I'll give her that. She was committed to the performance until the end. I let her finish. Then I said nothing for a moment. Nora, I kept my voice level and quiet. You drove 3 hours to ask me to intervene in my son's marriage, and you brought Samuel along to help make the ask. She started to speak. That's the second time, I said. The first time you used him to keep us out. This time you're using him to pull me in. He's 8 years old. The room went very still. Dad, I didn't. Please talk to Gabriel. Gabriel called me, I said. 3 weeks after that newspaper article ran. We've been talking every single day since. He doesn't need my permission for anything. He's a grown man and has made his decision before you got in the car this morning. She stared at me. He knew you'd come, I said. He knows you, Nora. Whatever else went wrong between you two, he knows exactly how you think. Her face went through about 4 different expressions in 2 seconds. The performer finally running out of script. And then, right on time, I heard tires on the gravel driveway. Gabriel's car. Nora turned toward the window, watched him park, watched him get out, turned back to me with something desperate moving behind her eyes. Come on, I said, standing. I want to show you something. I took her to the workshop. Gabriel came in through the back and followed without a word. We'd talked through this moment on the phone 2 days earlier, and he understood his role was simply to be present. Dorothy brought Samuel in quietly and stood near the door with her hand on his shoulder. My workshop is a clean, organized room, 12 by 16 feet, added onto the back of the house myself in 1987. Pegboard walls with outlines for every tool. Workbench along the south wall. Good light. Smells like sawdust and linseed oil, and I will not apologize for loving that smell. Along the east wall, on a set of shelves I'd built the previous year specifically for this purpose, were the boxes. 8 years of birthday packages, Christmas gifts, the books, the carved toys, Dorothy's cards, all of it retrieved from Gabriel after he found the attic box, brought to me, stacked neat and clean and labeled by year. I watched Nora see them, watched her face. She knew what they were before I said a word. Every time we couldn't give Samuel something in person, I said, we found another way. I picked up a folder from the workbench, set it on the flat surface between us. Every birthday, every Christmas, for 8 years. She looked at the folder, didn't move. I put the equivalent amount into a college trust fund. Every year, what I would have spent on a gift, plus what I could manage on top of it. She opened the folder slowly, like she was afraid of what the numbers would say. They said quite a lot. I am not a wealthy man by any visible measure, but Dorothy and I had spent 40 years putting away what we could, quietly and consistently, because we agreed when we were young that we would be solid if we couldn't be showy. We would not look like much. We would be steady underneath. The trust fund for Samuel, at the time Nora opened that folder, contained enough to cover 4 years at any state university in Georgia. Comfortably. The man she had called too poor to hold his own grandchild had been quietly building her son's future while she was hiding birthday cards in the attic. Nora's hand shook, very slightly, but I saw it. She closed the folder. And then Samuel, who had been standing quietly beside Dorothy near the door, looked at his mother with those steady, watchful eyes, and said the thing that I think will echo in Nora's memory for the rest of her life. Mom. She looked at him. His voice was very calm, the preternatural calm of a child who has understood far more than the adults intended. He never forgot me. Grandma either. Not even one time. Nora's face crumpled. Then he looked at me and then at Dorothy and held out both hands. One for each of us. Can I stay here for a while? Dad said it was okay. Dorothy took his hand before I could move. I took the other one. Nora stood in my workshop with her last play spent, her audience of one having already made his choice, and she had nothing left. I turned to her one final time. I want to be precise about the tone because it would be easy to make this cruel, and it was not. I was not cruel. I was just done. Nora, I never hated you. I never wanted you to fail. I never spent one day of the last 8 years plotting against you. I let that settle. I just quietly waited for the truth to do what I never had to. She walked out of the workshop, through the kitchen, out the front door. I heard her car start, heard the gravel under her tires, heard it go quiet. Dorothy looked at me over Samuel's head, just looked at me, the way she has looked at me for 43 years when words aren't necessary and wouldn't add anything anyway. I nodded. She nodded back. Who's hungry? She said, looking down at Samuel. Me, he said immediately. Good, she said, because I have been waiting 8 years to feed you properly. And she walked him back into the house. The divorce was finalized months later. Gabriel got primary custody. Douglas Holt had been thorough, as advertised. 8 years of hidden correspondence paints a vivid picture for a family court judge. Samuel splits his time between Gabriel's apartment and our house on Ridgewood Lane, in Macon, and I will tell you without exaggeration that the weeks when he's here are the best weeks of our lives. He and Dorothy have a garden now. His rose, her rose, a friendly ongoing disagreement about the correct way to stake a tomato plant. He is in the workshop with me every Saturday morning without fail. He is building a rocking chair. His hands are getting steadier every week. Brandon Cole wrote a follow-up piece for the Gazette after the story got around the way stories do in small Georgia towns. On the mantel in my living room, next to the walnut rocking horse with Samuel burned into its side, there is now a photograph, taken in this workshop on a Saturday in October. Samuel is at the workbench with his safety glasses on, concentrating on a piece of wood like it owes him money. Dorothy is leaning in the doorway behind him with her arms crossed, and the quiet smile she gets when something is exactly right. I am standing beside the boy with my hand on his shoulder, and apparently the worst possible expression on my face because I didn't know Brandon was there again with a camera. I look like a man trying very hard not to cry in front of his grandson. I look like the happiest man in Georgia. People ask me sometimes whether I think Nora got what she deserved, whether I feel satisfied, whether justice was served, and the honest answer is that justice is too loud a word for what happened. What happened was quieter than that. A woman made a series of choices over 8 years, and those choices made a series of consequences, and eventually the consequences arrived at her door the same way she arrived at mine, unexpected, and with no good options left. I didn't cause that. I just outlasted it. The woman who called us poor turned out to be the poorest person in the room. Not in money, but in character, in patience, in love. And in the end, that's the only currency that compounds. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. A big shout out to Christina Scott from New Mexico. See you in the next story.